The background. Midway through my senior year at college, my father got the privilege of opening the first plant in China when his company was granted permission. He was getting everything, and I mean everything. Business class on airfare, a penthouse, recognition in the company for being effectively in charge of the project, mingling with the higher-ups in the company, the works. This was exciting news for him because he was close to retirement, and it seemed that his hard work was finally paying off. My mom was happy because now, with my younger brother starting college and me about to graduate, she and her husband of over 30 years could enjoy their empty nest. She loves us dearly, but she called my father her soulmate and wanted to spend their golden years together. However, things turned upside down in less than a year. Maybe the power went to his head. Maybe he was overwhelmed and stressed out with having to start a new life in a new country. Or maybe it brought out the ugliness that was already in his soul. I have no clue. I finished my senior year around Christmas time, only to see my father pack up his bags and leave us, saying he didn't want to be married to my mom anymore and was seeing someone else. To say the rug had been pulled out from under our feet was an understatement. It was like everything we had ever known had imploded. My father left us shortly before Christmas, and we started putting the pieces back together. I started working 2 jobs and slipping money into my mom's wallet because I was terrified my father would cut off our money. It was during this time we started therapy, and all 3 of us came to the realization that this man had been emotionally, verbally, and financially abusing us for years. It's something I'm still trying to work through, and I doubt I'll ever fully recover. Come springtime, my father had a change of heart. He contacted us and started making amends. Something in me was suspicious and held back, but I was happy because Mom was happy. She had lost a lot of weight, was crying constantly, and was all in all miserable. He returned home for a 2-week vacation and then proposed a 3rd honeymoon, if you will. He and Mom would return to China to work things out. My brother and I were staying back home as we were both busy with work and school. Mom and Father left us with some important numbers to call in case of an emergency, the email address of my father's immediate supervisor, whom I'll call Stan, and weekly Skype sessions so we could stay in touch. Mom and Father left for China, and it seemed that everything would work out. 2 weeks later, it was time for our weekly Skype session. The first week had been fine, and my brother and I were expecting to hear another good report. Instead of that, Mom was alone, her eyes swollen and her face red. I immediately went into Mama Bear mode and asked my mom in a voice that probably scared my brother and Mom what happened. Mom, crying, tells us that after making the rounds with the higher-ups, my father had packed his bags, told her he was going to Shanghai for 2 weeks with his girlfriend, and then told Mom, "I want you gone by the time I get back." Mom, floored by this, asked him how. Father, "I don't care how." Then he left my mother in the penthouse with little food, no clean water to drink. We had been warned to never drink the water in China because it was nasty, to say the least, and no way to navigate through a country where she didn't speak the language or get away home. She said, "I think he was using me to look good at work." Everyone was saying they were glad we were working out our problems. When I heard that, my fury boiled. I am fiercely protective of my family and friends. You can do whatever you want to me, but make any of my family members or friends cry, and you'll learn why it's a bad idea to pick on them. As much as I wanted to fly over to China, track down my father and his mistress, and make them feel every ounce of pain that my mother was feeling, I knew that wasn't a smart or practical idea. Instead, I'd have to embarrass him so everyone knew what a scumbag he is. And an idea came to mind. The plan. After getting the information I needed from Mom and calming her down, I worked on the first part of my plan, bringing Mom home. I didn't have any money, nor did I have a visa to visit. However, I did have Stan's email. Using the skills I honed for my creative writing and general business studies, I wrote a lengthy email to Stan, crying over the keyboard as I drafted it. I explained who I was, what was going on, and that I was worried for Mom. I asked him to please help me find a way to reach my mom and bring her home. I promised him that I would repay every penny, even if it took the rest of my life. I added my personal email and phone number as a finishing touch and asked him to contact me if he had any questions. After making sure it was perfect, a key lesson from my CW professor: make sure your writing is razor sharp. I sent it off along with a prayer that it would work. Stan never did return my email. But 24 hours later, Mom was safely home. I learned that Stan had gotten in contact with my mom within an hour of me sending the email, verified everything that had happened, and gotten her home on the first flight. I sent him another email thanking him for helping us and told him I would repay the expense when I could. That time, he did respond and said, "It's all right, thank you though." That was the extent of our conversation, but I am still very grateful to him for helping Mom, out of his own pocket if I'm not mistaken. He's earned my respect, and I hope, wherever he is, he's doing well. When Mom got home, it sunk in for us that the marriage was truly over, and we made plans to move on. They were divorced within a year, and we moved to Florida for a fresh start maybe a few years later. Mom found the new love of her life, who I call my stepdad, is working her dream job, something that never would have happened under my father, and is happier than I've seen her in a long time. My brother and I both are making our way in the world and finding ourselves after spending our lives as our father's perfect children. As time passed, I actually forgot about the email, until recently when Mom and I were talking about Stan, and she revealed what had happened. The aftermath. I was just hoping to humiliate my father. Instead, my email launched massive legal and financial headaches for my father. Right after helping my mom get home, Stan decided that my father's behavior was worrying, because if he's using his wife to hide the fact he has a mistress, what else is he hiding? And started an investigation into my father. What he learned was mind-blowing. Not only was his mistress one of his subordinates, which is strictly against company rules for reasons I can't remember, but he had another mistress on the side, both of whom he was plying with expensive gifts and vacations, to name a few. But that wasn't the topper. What was evidence that my father might have been embezzling money from the company during his time in China. However, for reasons that I don't know, criminal charges were out of the question. Instead, what they did to him, my father no doubt thinks, was even worse. My father was immediately demoted and sent home. His name was removed from the factory he had built, and his mistresses fired. Now, with this company, most of the promotions come not from what you know, but who you know. And since Stan knows many people, eventually my father was forced to retire early before they fired him. He decided he had been discriminated against and tried to sue the company for unlawful termination. However, the evidence against him was overwhelming and he lost. Now he's disgraced, hated by nearly everyone, and with limited contact with his family and friends. He's still convinced that he's an innocent victim, and that time will prove him right. But everyone knows the truth. Do I feel guilty about helping to bring down my father? I'll let Montresor's motto be my answer. Nemo me impune lacessit.
Next story.
So basically, I moved into a 2-beat apartment 2 months ago with Sarah and Jessica. Names changed. Now Sarah is on the lease. Jessica is Sarah's girlfriend and isn't on the lease. I pay 50%. Sarah pays 25%, and Jessica pays 25% of rent. Not my ideal situation, but I was desperate for roommates at the time. Fast forward 2 months. They're enormous slobs who never do anything, so I clean up after them all the time. I vacuum the living room, mop the kitchen, do dishes, etc. I buy most of the shared groceries and household items like TP, which the two of them plow through really quickly. Sarah has a cat in the apartment which is unauthorized, and regularly has an unauthorized dog here too. Their rent is paid late and utilities on the last possible day. Also, the girls smoke copious amounts of weed, and while I don't care, I ask them to be respectful enough to air out the apartment and keep the smoke out of my room. Now last week, shit goes south. Sarah and Jessica overheard me bitching about having to clean up after them, and after ignoring me for a few days, sent me a long text about how rude they considered that, etc. So I let out everything that was bothering me, and tell them that if they don't want to live with me, I'll gladly release them from the lease, repay the deposit, and they can go. This causes them to freak out, and they tell me, "It's 2 against 1. We will force you to move." Oh hell no. I blocked them on all forms of social media and means of communication. The next day, I went down to the apartment managers and reported the 2 unauthorized pets and the unauthorized occupant. Written notices were given. Sarah and Jessica threw them straight in the trash. I returned from a 4-day stay at my dad's and go straight to report the unauthorized occupant Jessica, who has already once been asked to leave, and both unauthorized pets, which were supposed to be gone by now. Well, at this point, Sarah and Jessica are getting pissed off. Jessica screams obscenities at me anytime I enter or leave my bedroom. Twice she spent a half-hour period pounding on my door and the walls of my room. She taunts me through the door trying to get me to open up. All of this is being quietly recorded on my phone, while I still haven't said a word. So yesterday, I went back down to the office to finish securing my new apartment and to report more violations. When I came home, the chain lock was locked, so I had no way to get in. This is what I had been waiting for. Jessica taunts me again, on video, and then slaps my hat off my head, hitting me square in the forehead with the back of her hand. Bingo. The revenge. I call the cops, rat Sarah and Jessica out for being druggies, get all their paraphernalia confiscated, and get a police report for battery. Come Monday, I'll be on my way to the prosecutor's office to press charges. The apartment managers will also be getting a copy of this report. Also, tomorrow is the last day to pay rent before it's late. Sarah and Jessica disappeared early this morning. If they don't pay rent, I'm gonna get them on the abandonment clause, finally get them evicted, and have the locks change. All before I move out tomorrow. It's 2 against 1. Think again.
Next story.
This was about 5 or so years ago. I was working as a server at a pretty nice place. It was a brand new restaurant, so servers as well as managers are still getting their grip on things, and things are changing rapidly as management figured out what works best, etc. We had this assistant GM we'll call Carl that had a terrible superiority complex. He would treat me and the rest of the staff like we were always incompetent, but was super buddy-buddy and friendly with the GM and owner, so nothing was ever said or done about his behavior. Carl was married to his very pregnant wife, we'll call her Sarah, that would come in around lunch quite often to bring him homemade goodies and say hi. This was incredibly awkward for the staff, as we all knew Carl was sleeping with another server we'll call Rebecca. Rebecca would also often be working when his wife would come in and would be extra friendly towards her. Carl would kiss his wife and be sweet and loving, etc. I didn't say anything, and neither did anyone else, even though we often talked about how terrible we all felt for Sarah and whether we should. But ultimately nothing was ever said until I'm working a crazy dinner rush, in the weeds, still doing a great job with my tables as I had already been serving for around 8 years at this point, when Carl calls me over to a table. The guests are sitting with their freshly brought out dishes as Carl proceeds to ask me in the most condescending tone, "Can you tell me what's missing from this table?" I proceed to look and realize one of the guests doesn't have a steak knife yet. Totally my job to bring one before the steak is served. I messed up. So I say steak knife, and proceed to turn to go grab one. Carl grabs my arm and forces me to stand there as he tells me how unacceptable it is to forget a steak knife, and that these types of mistakes will not be tolerated, and I should be very careful about remembering these things going forward, etc. The guests look very uncomfortable at this point, and bake of his raised tone, and how close the booths are. I notice the neighboring tables are listening as well. I flushed red and apologized, and went to get the steak knife. Proceeded to do very well the rest of my shift. The next few weeks my shifts are cut to 2 lunch shifts a week, and no dinner shifts. compared to my usual 4 dinner shifts and 3 lunch shifts, running a double one of the days. I become very concerned immediately as I'm living pretty much week to week off my tips/paycheck. I go into my next shift early and ask to speak with a manager. Carl's already in his office waiting. I ask about my schedule, and he proceeds to tell me that they've hired new staff and everyone's hours have been reduced, etc. Okay. Only when I go and ask my coworkers, 2 of them complain that they were given my shifts and actually don't want them, and were upset to be working the weekend, etc. Same thing happens for 2 more weeks before I'm finally able to speak with our GM, who informs me that Carl does the scheduling and did voice the steak knife incident and use that as his rationale that I'm not cut out for dinner shifts. I'm livid as I really was working so hard, was recognized by my other managers for doing so well, and was never addressed for any other issues, only given praise. This proceeds to happen for another month before I finally get another server job I had applied for pretty much 2 weeks after. I quit the other place. I excel and am quickly promoted to closing the new restaurant, as well as given the best closing shifts because of my work ethic. As all this was happening, I really kept replaying every conversation I had with Carl and how absolutely rude and demeaning he was to not only me but everyone else. We often had girls cry during the shift because of his behavior. So, I try to see if I can find his wife on Facebook, as I know his first and last name. Find her right away. As I'm no longer working there, I decide to send her a message right from my personal account, detailing what I saw with him and Rebecca while I was working there. I mean, it was terrible. Rebecca wasn't shy about telling anyone who would listen about the hotels they'd rent for the weekend, what their sex life was like, how he says his wife just doesn't please him anymore, etc. I told her everything with as much detail as possible. She reads the message, but I get no response. 2 weeks later, I hear they're divorcing, and he's been fired because his conduct was finally revealed to the owner after another server quit on the spot in the middle of a shift because Carl yelled at him in front of the staff about not folding the napkins correctly. Last I heard, Carl moved to a small town in the middle of nowhere where he's the manager at a local diner. His wife remarried and took full custody of their baby boy.